Um, excited to jump in. Almost 200 of you. This is great. So excited. We have such a great panel lined up. And yeah, make sure we've dropped the link in the chat. I think the first link wasn't necessarily working, but make sure you sign up. If you want the recordings, we also send out a bunch of free resources and tons of other events like this. So make sure you sign up for Leland if you want all of that stuff. We'll send it all out at the end of the week. So yeah, make sure you take care of that. There's the QR code, and then there's also the link in the chat, and Erica's dropping it. This is the first of many med school week events. We're going to cover a ton of ground. So make sure you register for all of the events individually. If you don't register for them each individually, then you won't get the Zoom links and all the other stuff that goes with them. So make sure you go and do that. We'll make sure to drop in the chat the link where you can actually go and register for those. Yeah, Erica just dropped it in. Thank you, Erica. So we're going to cover school selection. We're going to cover the MCAT, rec letters or letters of evaluation, personal statements, interviews, all that kind of stuff. And also share a bunch of free resources as a part of this week as well. So this is just the beginning. I know many of you are already kind of in the thick of working with a coach on Leland. Many of you are probably hearing about Leland for the first time. So excited to get to know you better. This is the lineup for the week. I mentioned some of the sessions. This is the kickoff. And then you get like a 15-minute break and you can just jump right into an event about the MCAT. And then we have a personal statement event later tonight as well. And then we also have additional events on personal statement and other things around school selection and kind of making sure you're set up for success with interviews. And then an office hours AMA on Thursday, just to make sure you're getting all your questions answered. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. We do have a lot of you, and Madeline, Veronica, and I will do our best to answer questions. If we can't get to them, though, definitely recommend either reaching out to these coaches on Leland and setting up time, or going to some of these additional sessions. But we want to help you. We want to get your questions answered. And yeah, we're excited to be here with all of you. We know this process is a lot. It's exciting. It's stressful. It's fun, but it's also it's something that you shouldn't do alone. And we're excited to be here to help. So just kind of quick logistics, as I mentioned, make sure you're RSVPing for all of the sessions that you want to attend. Make sure you're signing up to get all the recordings. And yeah, I think we've covered most of these. So just kind of quick overview. We're going to be doing some introductions. I'll cover that quickly. Most of the meat, though, is going to be in this med school expert panel, where I'm going to be asking our panelists questions about the application process and just trying to get as much value as possible to all of you. And then we'll wrap things up at the hour. We're pretty good about staying on time, so we'll do our best to answer all of your questions, but we will try to stick to as well. Okay, so just quick introductions. My name is John. I'm the CEO of Leland. I did not go to medical school. My sister's in medical school, though, and obviously I have several friends and lots of customers that we've helped apply to medical school. You will also see Erica, Josh, and Amelia in the chat, sending you links and resources and just trying to be helpful. Big shout out to Erica, Josh, and Amelia for all the hard work that they put in to make this event tonight possible. Many of you are probably just getting to know Leland, but you'll hear a lot from them, and they're here to help. And we're excited to be supporting you on this journey. I also want to let our panelists introduce themselves because they're very impressive. Madeline, I'll kick it over to you first, and then over to Veronica. Daniel is just on his way home, as many of you probably can relate as med school students. He's on the go, and he'll be joining us just a little bit late. So, Madeline, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Hi. Nice to virtually meet everybody. As John said, my name is Madeline. I'm an M1 at Stanford Medicine, and I graduated just this last May from Harvard College, so I can speak to the journey of an applicant who wants to come straight out of college to med school and what the journey looks like of like figuring out that you want to go to medical school during college, getting everything ready in time to apply to go straight through.
That's great. Veronica?
Hi, yeah, I'm Veronica. So I am a first-year resident at Cedars-Sinai in cardiothoracic surgery. I graduated from MIT in 2016. I studied bioengineering there. I did apply to go straight through to medical school and then took a break in the middle of my medical school. I was an Olympic rower, so that's what I did kind of on my extra time in between. I got some experience coaching athletes there. And I guess that was kind of to enhance what I did when I was an undergrad. I guess as an undergrad, I started by tutoring through the Office of Minority Education. I tutored organic chemistry because it was a really hard class for pre-med students to take, and it was a really hard class for me. And so I can talk from the transition from, trying to do well to have a good GPA in medical school to then turning all the hours I spent trying to get myself to do well to also help other people. I actually had like a huge set of flashcards that kept going on year after year after I graduated. But it's kind of like garnishing that experience in undergrad, tutoring people. Then I started like a pre-health group for minority students in undergrad, and partnered with the Massachusetts Medical Hispanic Alliance, and all of this sorts of things kind of started since I was an undergrad. I'm a huge proponent for people spending the time doing the things they're passionate about, and that will get you to where you have to be instead of just kind of checking boxes. As you can tell, I ended up, hitting my dream residency, even though I like took some time off in the middle to do sports. So I'm a huge proponent of, if you're passionate, things will turn out the right way because you'll convince others that you can work hard for what you want to do. And then kind of like how I transitioned that through like coaching and rowing, and then coming back being a teaching assistant in medical school, and also helping others like get into medical school and beyond. Now I continue to do that as well for people who want to get into residency, specifically in cardiac surgery, because I don't have many advices for other residencies, but for medical school, it's broad for anyone who is interested in any kind of specialty. So not a very common path, but I am very experienced with people who've traveled all kinds of paths to go into medical school.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's definitely, and we'll definitely want to hear from you in the chat as well, everyone listening. But I would imagine there's lots of folks coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, so it's super helpful to hear, these different perspectives. So if you can drop in the chat, where are you studying, or if you're working, and what's your dream medical school program? This is probably going to explode the chat because we have almost 250 people, but it's always fun to hear where everyone's at. There's definitely, we'll see who's dialing in from farthest away. All right, starting in the US mostly. Got Fresno, Emory, Kentucky, Central Michigan. Come on, where are the people that are like in Dubai or somewhere crazy? Let's see. BU. It's great. Well, thanks for joining. This is awesome. It looks like we're covering like every university in the US at least. I'm sure there's lots of others around the world. Many of you that are probably in other countries that are going to be watching the recording because it's the middle of your night. Cool. We'll let those kind of trickle through and keep going, but it's just always fun to see. This is obviously a very stressful and oftentimes very lonely process. And so it's fun to kind of go through it with a community. All right, we got Australia. That's probably the record we got so far. Nice job. Cool. Well, just to kind of give you a quick introduction on Leland, I won't bore you with this, but I think it's important because so many of you are probably coming across Leland for the first time. So we are a platform that does free events like this all the time to try to provide free value, and then connects you with coaches like the folks on this panel who can do one-on-one coaching through every step of the application process to make that much more approachable. It's just too important of a process. It's very complex. There's all sorts of different things that go into it. And having someone that has been in your shoes and has helped other people in your shoes can make a world of a difference. And we see that every day through the real life acceptances that our coaches have helped with. Just thousands of people that are reaching their goals, and it's so fun. And this is what we want for all of you on this call. So please let us know how we can help you. And this is just the beginning for many of you. Oftentimes people wonder, what do coaches help with? And typically the deeper you get into the process, the more you kind of understand why having a coach or a tutor on the MCAT or an admissions consultant to kind of help you work through everything, you start to realize why you need that. But it's everything. It's kind of the application strategy, school selection, figuring out where you want to apply and how to think about that process, to getting into the actual application building and writing your personal statements, creating your essays, creating your secondaries, interview prep, all the different parts. And we have coaches that kind of fit every budget, background, and goal. So we have admissions officers at all these top medical schools. We also have students, alumni, and everything in between, because everyone kind of wants something different. And so our goal is to kind of meet you where you're at, and help you end to end, or just help you with, different parts of the application that you're most stressed with. So if you have questions, we have we're definitely happy to hop on a call with you. Many of you have already scheduled calls, but we'll drop those links in the chat. This week, for medical school week only, we're doing kind of the biggest medical school discounts that we do all year. So we have these comprehensive medical school packages that help you end to end, and you actually get $1,000 off all of those packages this week. And here's the code. We will send these codes. You can write them down, but we will also send them in the chat and in emails as follow-up. And then some of you that don't want a comprehensive package, just want kind of one-off coaching sessions, we also have coaching memberships, and you get $50 off using this code. So we're doing these discounts to try to help you and kind of kick off this medical school application cycle strong. If you're a junior or sophomore or freshman and just getting going, I'd probably recommend the coaching membership. If you're like in the thick of applying, the comprehensive package is obviously the most robust solution, but you can also do the coaching membership and set up time with the team if you don't know. There's actually this QR code in the top right is where you can actually build your plan. But feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Many of you have set up calls. I'm actually taking some of the calls because we have so many that are flowing through. So yeah, you'll talk to some of the team members and make sure that you get the right solution for you. Okay, Erica's dropped a bunch of those links in the chat. We'll keep moving. But yeah, let us know if you have any questions. We're here to help. All right. So you're a pre-med student thinking about applying to medical school. You're overwhelmed with all of the pieces that go into creating a top-tier candidacy. And there's all sorts of tips that you hear online. So, obviously you're trying to get started early. You're trying to do research to figure out which schools you want to apply to. You need to select activities, achievements, and passions, as Veronica was mentioning, that really highlight why this is a career path you're interested in. You're trying to get, the best grades and MCAT score you can possibly get. Nail down letters of recommendation, writing standout personal statements, preparing your secondary applications. And we didn't even mention interviews and all the other pieces that go into it. I'm curious, just if you could drop in the chat, there's now 250 of you, so this is going to be a lot, but which part of the application process, as you look at everything, and there's obviously much more than even this, which part of the application process feels the most daunting to you? This helps us as we start to kind of hone in on certain parts. Yep, we typically see a lot of test, MCAT, a lot of personal statements. Yeah, it's sort of MCAT, and then you check the MCAT box and you start to realize you need to put the pieces together, and that's where personal statement and all the other pieces come in. Secondaries, interviews, letters of rec. So I applied to business school and went to Stanford, and I was always really stressed about letters of rec because it felt like it was the only part I couldn't control. And there's actually a lot of things you can do to control that and empower your recommender. So we'll talk through some of these strategies. Okay, great. Well, we'll let that kind of continue to trickle through the chat. Let's open it up with just kind of a simpler, well, maybe it's not a simple question because it's so big, but kind of a more general question. And we'll start with you, Veronica. What's like one of your best tips for someone applying to medical school? And then we'll go to you, Madeline. You're on mute.
I'm muted. I think I kind of hinted at this on my intro, but I think, there is a huge pool of applicants that applies to medical school. And I'm not sure as the statistics are still the same, but there used to be that less than 50% of people who apply get in. And, what distinguishes someone who gets into a medical school from someone who doesn't? Yes, there's the academic and qualifications and the numbers, but I think a big part of it is you making other people see you as a standout candidate. And it's your job to just make other people see the good job that you have done. It's one is the job that you have done, and two is like projecting it onto other people. And I think how that ties to what I was bringing up earlier about doing things you're passionate about is, you're going to be a lot better at showing other people that what you do is cool, unique, important, and matters to their program if you are convinced yourself that what you're doing is something you like and are passionate about. If you can't convince yourself that what you're doing is worth it, how are you going to convince somebody else, right? And so what that extends to is, I think there's the go check boxes and kind of tack here and there, how there's not there's not a full list of boxes that you can tack and then like, oh yeah, I'm done. Now I'm going to get into medical school. I think there's like certain characteristics that people look for in what's it called when they're reviewing your application. And there's a lot of different ways to meet those qualities, like you can show that you care about people by volunteering at a hospital, like the more traditional way, or you can do other things like teaching or coaching in sports or being in a team and having good teamwork and like being voted the VIP of your team. Like there is many ways to get to the same path, and I guess to summarize that, like I think the numbers and like the quantitative stuff gets your application to the table, but once your application is on the table, it's more like a round table discussion where not everyone on that committee read your application. There's going to be one or two people at most on that committee table that read your application, and they're going to sit and discuss you, and you have that one or two person advocate who's the only person who read your full application, and they have to summarize it into a few standout sentences. So you have to make it very easy for them to like have an outline of like 10 lines of who is this candidate and do we want them? And that's it. I'll let Madeline talk.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I don't want to completely repeat Veronica, but I think I'm going to, because that's my top tip as well. So much of the process is like externally facing, and it can be like John said, like a very lonely and sometimes very mechanical process of checking these like seeming boxes that it feels like you have to check in order to make it through this process. But that's certainly not all of it, as Veronica said. And I think also making sure that you are very reflective throughout the process is one of the most important things you can do for making sure that you're checking those boxes well. Everybody that's here and wants to go to medical school has a very strong and personal and interesting reason for wanting to go. I think that's true of everybody that has a passion for this field. And making sure that you keep in touch with that rather than let the, difficulties of this process distance you from that is what's going to help you stand out both within and outside of all of these kind of different hoops that you have to jump through on the way. Like Veronica was saying, the strongest story is going to be one that you're able to tell passionately, and something that you're able to speak about with passion is usually something that's true. And so even like non-traditional paths and non-traditional motivations come through extremely well in the application process because they're so genuine. Like I remember in my own application process, I used to wrestle right when I was starting to apply to med school. I was like, how was I going to explain that I studied classics like Latin and Greek in college? Like nobody does that. And it ended up being like my interviewer's favorite things to talk with me about. And ended up being one of the strengths of my application because just like everything else, it led me to medicine in some way. And so everything in your life that you feel like might not fit into what the ideal application looks like, it will fit into your ideal application, because it's a part of your story and that it's a part of your identity.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you both. Okay, let's get into some of the tactics of it, I think. So timeline is often hard with medical school because it sort of feels like you're constantly preparing always. But when someone comes to you, let's say they're a freshman in college, like how do you recommend thinking about timeline? Maybe we'll go back to you for this one, Madeline. And one thing I guess I wanted to call out that I forgot to mention at the beginning is we're actually raffling off 3 free coaching sessions for 3 people that sign up for Leland during this event. So make sure you sign up for Leland if you haven't already. We're going to raffle those off at the end. I forgot to mention that. I just got pinged. So sorry. Back to you, Madeline. What's the ideal timeline to prepare?
Yeah, this is a complicated question. It depends on, I think it depends on the individual. There are some people that think that that want to go straight to medical school after college, like myself. And I think Veronica, you mentioned that you did the same thing. In that case, there are recommended timelines, which is that if you're a freshman and you know that you want to go to medical school, like a common timeline that I hear about is planning for and preparing for and taking the MCAT by the end of sophomore year, and then assembling and submitting applications like junior summer, and doing interviews in senior year. I did not follow that timeline. I learned that I wanted to go to medical school a little bit later in college, but I decided I still wanted to go straight through. So it's possible to like take the MCAT and apply to medical school a little bit more closely in succession. It's just the design of that part is up to you and what you think is manageable with your schedule and the demands on your life. But also I do want to mention that a lot of people find it really valuable to take one or multiple gap years between college and medical school, to work or do research, or even do just like other passion projects. And if that is something that feels right to you, that then again, like back to the message that I was trying to send before, like that's part of your journey and will probably make you a stronger candidate if that's something that you feel like is something that you're really passionate about. So I wouldn't say there's an ideal timeline to prepare, but there are definitely like goalposts you can hit if you do, if you're like in college and wanting to apply to go straight through.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else you'd add, Veronica?
I think the one thing that I add is like, as soon as you know that med school, even if you're not sure, I think visiting your school's pre-health office as early as you might be interested is the most helpful thing. I found that, even people who were my counterpart undergrads, um, people who waited until the last moment to go to the pre-health office and figure out the internal logistics of it, I often ended up with a little bit of resentment or being frustrated. I think each school has its own internal timeline. A lot of schools are doing this where they collect your letter of recommendations and then they draft this huge package that they sent out or whatever it is, but they're going to have their own internal timeline that differs school to school. And they're also going to have specific recommendations of like what to do if your GPA is X or Y. And, I think in my school, they liked to tell people like, oh, like you should have done this class instead or whatever. I think like whatever advice, like even if you end up using it or not, I think my strategy was go to the pre-health office early on, because if I do everything you tell me, then you can't at the end of it tell me that you don't think I'm ready or whatever it is. Like, so like, even if you're not 100% sure, there's no harm in getting advice that you don't use, right? So just like go to the pre-health office, figure out what the internal logistics are, figure out what they have to offer for you. Like a lot of times schools have like multiple mini interview practice sessions that are completely organized for people who are interested. And there's never a harm in like learning about things early enough. I think in terms of like MCAT and stuff like that, obviously like it's beneficial to know your MCAT score before you apply. So I think, cutting it very close where you don't know your MCAT score before you apply may be a little bit too late. I think I took my MCAT halfway through my third year, and that was like kind of like I decided the timeline of that based because I took the old MCAT. Actually, I took the last session of the old MCAT, and so I didn't want to study for the new one. So that's kind of like how I chose my timeline. But I do recommend trying to take it before the end of your junior year if you're trying to go straight through, because that summer and between your junior and senior year, you should really be trying to focus on applying early. I think a lot of the schools these days are on a rolling basis for applications, and it really does make a difference if you apply early or late, if you're kind of on the edge of like, like being a great applicant versus being like a good applicant. Like, it really makes a difference if you try to get your applications in like on the earlier side of things, even though some of the schools are not rolling basis and they will just tell everyone in March if they're admitted or not. So that's kind of like my thought process is, like make sure that you have your score before the summer of which you're applying. That's kind of like my cutoff. Yeah.
Yep. It's great. Okay. Super helpful. All right. We got a lot of questions about, or at least a lot of stress around the MCAT. I'm sure this is very, very common. Madeline, maybe we'll go back to you. How do you recommend preparing for the MCAT? Okay, we'll go back to Veronica. Sorry, maybe.
Oh, sorry. It was just saying that I couldn't unmute myself.
Oh,
All good now. Yeah, my first tip for preparing for the MCAT is to not be scared of it. It can be a very big and scary thing to think about. But really like you can approach it as something that you can accomplish because you can. And really making a long-term plan based on what has worked best for you in terms of studying for other tests in the past. What I liked to do was when I first started studying for the MCAT, I thought, okay, what's the best I've ever done on a test? And what worked for me and made it so that I performed really well on that test. Because the same study strategies are not going to work for every single person. That's the case for like tests in school, and that's also the case for tests like the MCAT. There's no like one single solution or single way to study that's going to work for every single person. So reflecting on your past experiences taking tests and what works for you, using that to design a study strategy for yourself, and also giving yourself enough time. Because I think you should design a study schedule that like works out in your head, but also it doesn't leave you with like, if at the end of that study schedule you think, oh, actually, maybe I didn't plan this enough, I'm going to need like another month or two. You want to make sure that you're also giving yourself that space at the back end. So like Veronica's advice about really trying not to take the MCAT too late, like you want to have your score at least before you apply. Then thinking back to preparing for the MCAT and preparing your study strategy, I would say, like, if you are far enough in advance at this point, try to prepare a study strategy that will give you your MCAT score at least a few months before you absolutely need it. That way, if you get to the end of your study plan and you don't feel ready to take the MCAT, you can take more time. Because that's one of the best things to do is take the MCAT when you really feel ready for it rather than taking it when you feel like you have to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that other coaches will have other useful tips to say, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Maybe this is a good time. We have Daniel on the call. Daniel, welcome. If you don't mind coming off mute and giving a quick intro on yourself, and then if you have any thoughts on preparing for the MCAT, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Hey guys. My name is Daniel. Sorry for the background noise. I had some sort of technical difficulties joining. But I'm a medical student currently, rising fourth year at Harvard Medical School. And happy to be here and answer any questions you guys have. With regard to the MCAT, I think probably the biggest thing I would say is doing a lot of practice exams. That's what I found to be the most helpful and to be the biggest thing that increased my score. And so I think it's very tempting to feel comfortable just like doing a bunch of content review from the Kaplan, whatever exam resources you use in books. But I think the biggest gains you see in your score typically come from when you go into the you're doing a lot more practice questions, and that can feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes because you feel like you don't know all the content, and you're doing practice questions and content you don't necessarily like know yet or have mastered. But actually doing the questions is what like gives you the mastery of the content. It's sort of backwards, but I think, in my opinion, I think just dive in quickly into practice questions. Whether that's like a set of 10 questions, 20 questions, or even full-length exams as frequently as you can. I think that really builds stamina as well for the exam because it's also like a really long exam. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we definitely hear from a lot of our MCAT experts that test fatigue is so real, especially for a test as long as intensive as the MCAT. And so these full length practice tests are so valuable. We do have some awesome MCAT tutors. Many of them are on this panel, and so let us know if you want some additional tutoring. It can be really helpful in kind of getting you above the threshold. Okay, let's go to the next question. Veronica, I don't know. Well, maybe I'll open it up to any of you that have thoughts, but Veronica, if you have thoughts on this one, just in the interest of time, yeah, would love to get your thoughts or anyone else that feels strongly about this.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't yes, I can definitely talk about this. So I didn't take the gap year in the traditional sense because it wasn't in between my undergrad and my med school. Mainly because, I grew up in Puerto Rico, like my parents are not doctors. Like this thing of like going to school forever is just not a thing. And so I fully expanded that by not only going to med school, but being an athlete in between. But I think there's benefits to taking a gap year in terms of like developing yourself as a person, personality, acquiring experience. I can talk about how people look at that from the outside. I took it in a more unconventional way where probably more people were judging it because most people just don't disappear in the middle of med school and go do something. And so interestingly enough, when I was applying to residency, a lot of my conversations steer around what I did during that time. And I've heard from other colleagues that that's what ends up happening, when you do take a gap year. for your medical school, especially if it's more than one, because then you've had at least 1 year outside of your undergrad to talk about your experience. And so I think it shifts your application a little bit from, you know, just your extracurriculars in college to like, what is it that you're doing with your life? Like during this 1 or 2 years, or, you know, some people have other careers before they're doctors. And I think it can be really helpful, not just for the sake of getting in, but also for like your own professional development. You know, I think I learned sometimes just being in a higher education environment in this like kind of bubble all the time makes you think that that's what the entire world looks like, you know. And I think doing something completely different, which in my sense was sports, opened my eyes to be able to better interact. Like, you know, in a field like medicine, most of your patients are not going to be people who are like in this like 1% of education. Like, you know, like most of your patients are just regular people. And so like learning to like interact with regular people and having shared experiences with like people who are not in highly educated environments and taking a break to do that is actually very valuable for becoming a well-rounded doctor. You know, a lot of your day ends up being trying to like bond with your patients. And so it shifts your application. I can't say concretely if it helps it or it doesn't. I mean, definitely, I think if you don't have much to show for X or Y reason from your undergraduate because you had a hard time with school or whatever it was, like sometimes it can boost your application, you know, if you need to like prove yourself in some other ways because, you know, you had a hard time in school and the MCAT wasn't your friend, and, you know, you really think that this is what you want to do, but you just don't have the profile to do it quite yet. That's one reason to do it. But another reason to do it is just to become a more well-rounded person, you know, and like become a better doctor ultimately, even if it's not even if you do think you have the credentials to apply fully out of undergrad. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's my two cents.
there's one. Yeah, that's super helpful. There's I think there's a comment in the chat that I think like a lot of people can relate to, which is taking a gap year to figure out like why you want to be a doctor and kind of accelerate your path in that direction. And if you don't need it, you don't need it. And I think it's that, you know, that's great. But if it helps in that sense, it can be super valuable. All right, let's go to the next question. Maybe Daniel, we'll go back to you. Do you have any advice for students that do have a lower GPA or a lower MCAT score? How do they overcome that? Yeah, any thoughts or strategies you have on that?
Yeah, I can answer this. Sorry if it's a little bit loud again in my background.
It's okay.
But hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
All right,
You're good.
So what I'd say is if you have a low MCAT or GPA, I think, you know, that's only one piece of your application, and, you know, you can strengthen other parts of your application. So I'd say work on, you know, on doing that specifically for a lower GPA. You know, there are programs you can do like let's assume that's an low undergrad GPA. You can do like post-bacc program, and you know, several students have done that and like, you know, gotten like higher GPAs that they then like, you know, prove to medical schools that, you know, I can handle the course work by, you know, getting higher GPA. So that's one option. For a low MCAT score, you can always retake the MCAT. If you feel like you know you're going to apply with the, you know, you want to apply with the lower MCAT score, and, you know, you've taken it multiple times, that's still possible. I think you can strengthen other parts of the application, whether that's, you know, other things med school look for, whether that's even having like really strong extracurricular activities or research, or, you know, just some interesting part about your application that you can talk about. So yeah, I would say that's only one piece of the puzzle, and don't feel like extremely overwhelmed by having, you know, not the highest GPA or MCAT score.
Yeah, that's great. Madeline, anything else you'd add? There's also a question around, do you submit all MCAT scores or just your best? Yeah, if you have any additional thoughts on this.
Oh yeah. Well, for that question, I believe, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all of your scores are seen. But you can expect that an admissions committee will take into account like a trajectory and scores, and weight your most recent or highest score. But as for this question, similarly to Daniel, there are a lot of parts of your application, and GPA and MCAT they seem like very big and important ones, and oftentimes they are, but they're absolutely not all of it. And they're not all of what makes you a person. A lot of people will tell an extremely compelling story about their interest in medicine and their capacity within medicine that has nothing to do with their GPA or MCAT score, because those things can't necessarily be markers for things like personality traits and motivations and ability to succeed in the field. And so making sure that you're really reflective on your journey, as I've been saying this whole time, and able to tell a good story about why you would succeed in medicine, I think you can have a strong application, and GPA and MCAT are really not as important as you think if you're able to tell a good story. I don't want to discount what Veronica said earlier. Sometimes it is what gets you on the table, but it's absolutely not what necessarily like takes you off the table completely. A lot of people are considered with really good stories that might have applications that are lacking in like the more numerical areas.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe let's talk about school selection, kind of gauging competitiveness with MCAT. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, like having a score early enough to be able to kind of make some of that decision. But maybe we'll go back to you, Veronica. If you want to, yeah, do you have any thoughts on like approaching school selection, and how do you kind of balance dream schools versus kind of more schools within reach, and yeah, how do you recommend people go about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm looking here also in the comments, like people are asking like, what's a low GPA? What's a high GPA? There's always these like online, like big profile things that kind of like statistics wise tell you like on average, like what is, I think you can find like, you know, what's the average score of people accepted into a certain school, and like what's their range. Sometimes there's like a range of like, you know, what's the lowest score or the highest score they accepted people with. And like, I think that can help you place schools like in your like, you know, reach, which is like, you know, like if I'm like having a great application day and I wrote like the best application with my numbers, like that's where I want to go. Like that's my dream school. There's like, you're like, you know, these schools kind of meet my like numbers and like my type of people like go here. And then there's like schools that you might choose like that sometimes people I think feel like the state schools of where they are or whatever might be considered more of a safety. I think it depends on where you are from. How do you approach it? I mean, I think the biggest thing is numbers, honestly. I think I don't know how many schools like my
What's the
other
number?
counterparts in
What's
this
the number?
panel got recommended to apply, but I was recommended to apply to like almost 30 schools. So I think the numbers game is like a big one, you know, like there's this limited number of people of schools that the US has, but I think unfortunately I don't like to look at these like online systems too much, but that's kind of like the first pass through it is kind of like, you know, like numbers wise, what do people look like in these certain numbers of schools, and then having like I don't know, between 5 and 10 schools from like your reach list, your middle list, and your like what you consider as like easier to get into the list.
Yep. That's great. All right. In the interest of time, we're going to keep rolling because we have a lot of questions coming through the chat that I want to make sure we cover. So let's talk about the activities section. Maybe we'll go, yeah, Daniel, I don't know if you have thoughts on kind of how to think about both getting activities to go in that section, and also like how to think about preparing that and writing and prioritizing there. We'll go over to you.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, you reflecting on who you are, what kinds of, what story you're telling. And what activities have been the most meaningful to you over your med school, over your college sort of journey. You want to really think about, because there's like 15 different options for activities. And so think about the things that mean the most to you. And I think 3 of those options you can expand a little bit more, and those 3 most meaningful activities in terms of like writing more. So I think it's good to really start reflecting like who I am, what kind of what story do I want to tell, and like what activities do I want to like you know highlight in my application. People write a bunch of things from like research to summer research experiences they might have had, to hobbies, to shadowing, to all kinds of things. So just make a list. I think the more activities you have, the better, because schools like to see. Sometimes it is about numbers, and so like try to have as many activities on there as possible. And yeah, and I think even more important probably than the numbers, like how you speak about those activities or how you write about those activities in the sort of character limit you're giving. So you're not giving a lot of words to write that, but I think you really want to focus on what you did. How was it meaningful to you? What did you learn in the process? And like what impact it is. So speak and write, concretely in terms of, I, founded an organization and it had this impact within, this group. You want to really like speak as concretely as possible. And I think that really like speaks volumes as to like how impactful your work has been. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah, super helpful. And just to plug, we do have a lot of these sessions that are going to go much deeper into activities and much deeper into school selection. So make sure you sign up for all those sessions. Erica's dropping them in the chat. This session intentionally is kind of covering a lot of ground, but we're going to go much deeper because there's obviously lots of layers here. So that's super helpful. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, Madeline, we're going to go over to you for this question. How do you recommend and work with folks that are kind of approaching the personal statement? What's like, do you have any process that you go about what do you do for this part of the application?
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the most fun parts of the application because it's really where you get to get in touch with yourself and your motivations and reason for applying. And the process of writing a personal statement starts long before you even put your pen to the page or fingers to the keyboard. There's a lot of reflection that goes into the process. And so you can either what I found was I did a lot of thinking before I even started writing my personal statement. You can also just try writing drafts and drafts and drafts, and you'll be able to tell as you start writing, because it can kind of be hard to get things out in the beginning. You can kind of tell when you start to get towards a string that's like, oh yeah, I actually really do believe in what I'm saying. And I do really think that I'm reflecting my true motivations, my true values in this statement. And so you can just kind of iteratively reflect either in your mind or through the process of several drafts, but making sure that you are putting forward a message that you really believe in. Medical school admissions committees are reading a lot of personal statements. And so as yours should be as much you as it can be, because that's what makes you different from everybody else. It's your identity and your motivations and your story. So the more individual you can make it, the better and more it will stand out. And the way that you access those details and the ways of telling an individual story is really making sure to reflect in whatever way works for you on what it is that makes your story your own as opposed to anybody else's.
Yeah, that's great. Veronica, anything else you'd add on personal statements?
I mean, I think you Madeline touched on a lot of it. I think, personal statement, you need a hook. You need some sort of hook to get your reader engaged at the beginning. And something that kind of, I think when I've guided people through personal statements for med school and grad school and all of these things, that's one of the things that I've done the most is, the first time you write one, you can just write a lot about things you want to bring up and mention, but at some point you have to pick one or two of those things and really create a story with those. But one pitfall that people fall into, when they're talking about why they want to do med school, is they focus a lot on the particular situation with a patient, a family member, a volunteer activity or something. And they focus a lot on the situation that motivated them, but they don't talk too much about how that impacted them and the adjectives and the personality traits that are beneficial or allow them to be a good doctor. So I think, if you're talking about what inspired you to be a good doctor or whatever, if you're the personal statement, unfortunately, is a place where you have to be very selfish and just self-centered and talk about yourself, because it's your only chance to tell this admission committee who you are, right? So if you're telling someone why you're going to medical school and you have this beautiful story about somebody else, you can condense that story, summarize that reasoning in a couple sentences at the beginning of your narrative, and then explain how that situation or that person or whatever impacted you. What did you learn from it? What have you done since? And how is that going to make you a better doctor? Or how did that make you decide you want to be a better doctor? You have to literally in writing, articulate for somebody else, why are you a good candidate? Why are you going to be a good doctor? Should you be the one accepted into the medical school? and use that story, person, whatever, just to create a narrative and a beginning to your story or a good ending to your story. But don't focus too much on describing those things to your school, because you do have a limited number of characters, words, whatever it is, to express yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think it's always tough when you are talking so much about yourself, and it's always better to, as you mentioned, like have stories that kind of convey who you are, as opposed to just telling them, yeah, I'm really thoughtful, I'm really detail oriented. It's like, yeah, sure, but like show me how that, show me why. And they read a lot, as was mentioned by Madeline and Veronica, they read a lot of these. So why are they going to be thinking about yours when they go home at night after reading 100 of them? And I think a lot of it is that hook, that storytelling. That's great. Okay, so let's talk about letters of rec. I know this is the part of the process that really stressed me out, because again, you can't fully control it. But how do you think, maybe Madeline, we'll go over to you. Like, how do you think about preparing your recommenders to do a good job? And kind of how do you see them as being? What role do you see them playing in the application process?
Yeah, I think you're right that letters of recommendation can be like one of the most daunting parts of the process because it's one of the parts that's most out of your control, but it is one of the things that you can start to plan for the earliest. And so I would say as soon as you feel like you even have an inkling of wanting to go to medical school, proceed through the rest of your like classes in college or classes in your post-bacc, wherever you are in your journey, keeping in mind that you really do want to make strong connections with faculty members, mentors, other people that could give you good letters of recommendation. Um, and being able to be proactive about your choice of people who you ask for recommendations will really benefit you in the end, because it can be not the best position to be kind of like too close to the application process and be looking retroactively at people who have mentored you or people who have taught you in the past, and be kind of looking for recommendations there. You want to be able to form strong interactions, with the knowledge of like knowing that you want this person to eventually be able to like say good things about you and to be able to honestly attest to your value as an applicant. And so I think also keeping an open mind as well. A lot of letters of recommendation will like do have to come from in large part like science-based professors or like research mentors. But in general, like there's a little bit of flexibility in who can write a letter of recommendation. So like if you worked a full-time or part-time job in college that meant a lot to you, somebody that's like at that company that hired you or managed you might also be a valid person to write a letter of recommendation for you. So I would say my pieces of advice in thinking about letters of recommendation are do so proactively and do so with an open mind, making sure you work with your pre-health coaching team at whatever school you are at, or with your coach if you have one through Leland, to make sure that you're making a good selection of letters of recommendation. But yeah, being proactive, being open-minded about who can write for you, and making sure that you are just keeping strong like connections with your mentors or possible mentors throughout your time. It's going to serve you inside and outside of the medical school application process. So it's good advice anyway.
Yeah, that's really good
If
advice.
I
One of the things that we'll often, oh, sorry, go for it, Veronica. Did you have
if I
something you
can
wanted?
add something, because it's something that I think a lot of people don't think about, and something that I work on with all the people that I've helped get into medical school, is that a lot of people find awkward the process of asking for a letter and figuring out, oh, are they going to write a good letter or not? I wrote in my emails requesting for people, first, I like to meet with people in person because that way people can tell you yes or no. But also when I'm writing my email request, or once I got the yes, I can do a letter, I drafted a letter that said, this is the context in which I interacted with you. And I kind of had a list of qualities that I wanted people to talk about. So I said, this is the work I did with you. I did this class with you. I like visited your office hours, or you can remember me because of this. And I would love if you could speak to my X adjective, and like giving them some guidance. And I think a lot of people don't think that you can tell your letter writers what you want them to talk about, but you want each of them to talk about something different, because if they all say the same thing, it's just like kind of like one letter, so you can provide guidance. And I think that's what John was trying to get at like earlier on. It's like you can guide your letter writers as to like what is it important? And I think the MCAS application actually has, how I came up with this is, I think they have a document that says like, what are the things they would like the letter writers to like talk about? And so I took those bullet points and kind of divided them up into, you're going to talk about this, you're going to talk about that. And I think it's from like, there's like a document that your letter writers can see that says what the examples of things they can talk about. So I did them the effort of picking like one or two for each of them and just saying like, talk about these things. And I think that makes for people like, you know, you lower the threshold for them to decide like what to talk about. And like, you know, they've had like hundreds of students, like, how are they going to remember who you were? Just provide them with concrete examples, like, you know, like, oh, there was this one time in class that blah, blah, blah. And then they can put that in your letter. Like, you're not writing the letter for them, but you're giving them content that you remember that they might not, because like, you know, they have so many other students. And so you make that letter so much more valid by like reminding them. You're not like forcing them to say something they don't want to say, because they won't. You're just like providing them objective things they can include in your letter that make it sound more valid. And I think, you know, the letters of recommendation are a huge deal to get into medical school. They're also going to be a huge deal getting into residency and anywhere and like within the medical profession. It's like, who do you know and what do they have to say about you?
Yeah, it's super helpful. To that point, we actually have a recommender prep document that we're going to send out as well. So definitely prepare them. I think it's a great point. Like this is the way that you can control it without controlling it. You can give them ideas, you can give them suggestions, you can tell them to highlight specific things. And when they're looking at their stack of 10 recommendations that they've been asked to write, which one are they going to do first? The one that came with a nice, you know, template or something that told them, hey, you know, here's some ideas. So it's a great suggestion. All right, we're coming close on time. I just got the names of the people that won the free coaching session, which is great. So hang on. We have a couple last questions. We're going to do these as rapid fire, 20, 30 seconds each. Okay. And then we're going to know that everyone on this call, if you want to go deeper, there are sessions this week. They're going to go deeper on all of these. Okay. Daniel, can you give us the 30-second on secondaries? How do those work? What can people expect?
Okay, so basically secondaries are a different part of the application after the primary application, where you submit to the basic sort of application, and it involves more specifically writing essays that are geared towards specific schools and what they would recommend. So for example, prompts would be like, what specific, you know, thing interests you about coming to, let's say, Emory or like whatever school you're applying to. So it's a little bit more specific, and they can ask you, the prompts can be quite wide ranging, but that's pretty much it. And you want to try to turn them in pretty quickly, like within 2 weeks after you get them, ideally.
It's great. Okay. Love that. Madeline, we're going to go to you. If you don't think you're the most interesting or unique applicant, how do you stand out?
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think really everybody that has a true and deep passion and motivation for medicine has something very interesting and unique about themselves. It's a matter of like reflecting on yourself, your journey, and your passions. And if you do that kindly with yourself and give yourself time, you will be able to find the ways in which you're interesting and unique. And then really letting those parts of yourself shine through your application will make you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people that don't feel unique or interesting, it's because they're living with themselves. You're used to yourself, and oftentimes that reflection and having someone that maybe doesn't know you as well, kind of be that mirror for you and help you find those things and do that. I think it's so great. Okay, Veronica, any common mistakes that you see pre-med students typically make during an admissions process that you recommend avoiding? Yeah, any thoughts on this one?
I mean, I think one of the biggest no-nos is like, don't lie. Don't boast in your application. Don't lie. It would come back to bite you in the ass. Like, do not, sorry for my language, but like, do not lie, because like, you never know when that person is going to, and this is a simple example. Like, you know, like there's sometimes questions about like people talk about a hobby or something because it'll make them sound more interesting. And they'll say like they read X or Y, and then who knows, the person who's interviewing you like is a fanatic of that book, and they'll ask you a question and you're done. Like there's no way to recover from that. Like honesty is a big deal in medicine. Like it is very hard to recover from lying in patient care, because you have people's lives at your hands. And if you're starting from even before medical school lying, like that there's no way to recover. So that's like the one thing that I would say, like, do not lie in your application.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And if there are specific things that you feel embarrassed about or nervous about with a grade or a class or something, own it and talk about, there's sections on the application for you to highlight that. And it doesn't mean come up with a, crazy excuse. It means, being honest about what happened and then moving on and showing that you learned from it. Okay, we're going to skip the final tip because we've done a ton of tips. Go to the additional sessions. I just wanted to read the names of the people that won the free coaching session really quickly. We'll drop them in the chat. It's Emma Klauber, Lindsay Jefferson, and Amy Choi. So we'll ping you all directly. But thanks for being here live. We'll do some additional giveaways. So make sure you come. And can you guys show some love in the chat for the panelists? This was so interesting and helpful. I learned a lot about medical school, probably more than I ever needed to know as someone that's not applying to medical school. But this was great. This is awesome. Yeah. Wow. Lots of love coming through. 200 people strong. And yeah, make sure you join those next sessions. Make sure you build your custom coaching plan, chat with our team if you're not sure. Again, this week only, we're doing these crazy discounts, $1,000 off packages and $50 off any sort of membership. So make sure you take advantage of this. We'll get you matched to one of these coaches or a great coach that would be best for your goals. And yeah, we're excited to support you all. Thanks for joining and best of luck with everything you're working on. You can do this.